So hello and welcome to the Leap Forward podcast. This is the show where we explore the people, ideas, and innovation shaping the future of work, education, learning and leadership. And today I'm really delighted to be joined by a leader at the helm of one of the most influential creative universities in the world, and that is Professor Karen Stanton. She's the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Arts London, having served previous roles as in other institutions, across the UK for more than 2 decades, and I'm really excited to welcome you to Leap Forward, Karen.
Brilliant, thank you. Good afternoon, Justin. It's an absolute pleasure. And it's always a strange moment, isn't it, when people start to talk about how long you have been, in the sector and doing these jobs. But so University of Arts London, as you say, amazing institution, 6 colleges spread across London. We are Europe's largest creative education provider. And we offer a whole range of subjects. I mean, people may not necessarily understand what an arts university covers, but it is the full range of art, design, media, computational courses. We're doing robotics, we're doing courses in AI, and performance as well. So, it is a really broad range of subject areas that the university covers. And, as a Vice-Chancellor, we've got 22,000 students, we've got 5,000 staff. So it is a major responsibility to look after that community. And it's a real privilege, I have to say, to do the job.
And I think, at this time as well, your global stature and, impact, and the context of kind of the role of higher education, I'm really excited about sort of digging into that as part of this conversation, and of course the role of Vice-Chancellor as well. I think just again for perhaps someone who may not know that sort of role, as well as you do, how would you describe that?
Yeah, it is interesting because it's almost a sort of dual-hatted role, really. I am, as Vice-Chancellor, I'm the a senior academic leader within the institution, and I'm very mindful that, the quality and the standards of our curriculum and our courses, sits ultimately with me. And as I said, it's about leading that academic community. But it's also like being a chief exec of an organisation, a large organisation. All of the issues that many companies, many industries are facing into now are the same kinds of issues and problems that, are on my desk or on my senior team's desk on a weekly basis, whether that's looking at, future financial sustainability of the institution, whether it's looking at market competitors, whether it's looking at, the courses, or as other industries would say, that, the products that we have as an institution. So it is a dual-hatted role, I have to say. On the one hand, very much leaning into, research, teaching and knowledge exchange, which is the core mission of the university. But on the other hand, leading an organisation and leading a business to make sure that it is absolutely sustainable and meets the needs of industry, meets the needs of our students, in terms of the next stage of their careers as well. So yeah, it's an interesting role.
And when you're thinking about that sort of context, I suppose you're talking in there about sort of students and employability versus creativity, and talking about sort of kind of the role of industry, funding, technology, and we'll talk more about that, no doubt. Geopolitics, of course, there's a lot going on. From your perspective, sort of what makes this moment in 2026 sort of especially pivotal for creative education?
Yeah, so it is, I think, a really important moment. We listen very closely and carefully, of course, to our students and to our graduates. And our graduates who become alumni of the university, are going out into the world. They're setting up their own businesses, they're going into the creative sector, but they're going more broadly in different industries. And, what we're hearing now is that what they really value, I think, is partnerships with industry and the opportunity to understand how the education that we're delivering, the knowledge that we're delivering through our courses and the skills that we're delivering is going to enable them really to go on to get a job, to further their education or to set up their own business. We are the UK's biggest university in terms of startups. So most of our graduates go on to actually set up their own business in the first instance. So we're very focused on making sure those students have entrepreneurial skills, they understand, the basics of how they can operate in that environment. So in 2026, the focus is very much on skills, knowledge, and ensuring, the employability of our students. I think more broadly than that, because we are the largest creative education institution, one of our key roles is making sure that governments, policymakers understand, if you like, the role of creativity and creative education within an environment that is very focused, for example, on STEM, on science and technology and engineering. And, we were just chatting earlier, I think the role of creativity, creative education is absolutely vital in recognising the importance of, those skills and particularly how those skills sit alongside the use of artificial intelligence and technology more generally. So, being creative, having imagination, new ideas, new ways of delivering things, designing things in a different way, all of these skills are going to be really important, I think, sitting alongside what is happening in terms of that massive shift towards technology and technology-driven employment as well. So, we feel that we've got a really important role to play, really, in demonstrating how creativity is important. Our strapline, incidentally, is "The world needs creativity." And I think it absolutely does at this point. It really does.
I mean, you're preaching to the converted here. I'm really excited to kind of drill down more into that. Before we do it, though, I just wanted to kind of just reflect on, I suppose, in a sense, some things that you've sort of said, over your career about sort of, the importance of education, being, an enabler of transformation of lives, and when you think about sort of that sort of and apply that, in practice, how does that sort of, I suppose, sort of like come to life in terms of the UAL's mission?
Yeah, it really is. It really is a big responsibility. If I stand up at an open day when students and parents and grandparents and carers, coming into the university, they're making a big choice. There is a kind of financial implication now to the choice that they're making to come to university. I'm very conscious that whether it's undergraduate study or indeed postgraduate study at kind of master's level, people are having to weigh up lots of factors before deciding to undertake a creative education course. So I think, that responsibility coupled with, watching what happens at graduation, when those students who came to us at open day, 3 years later or a year later, actually cross the stage, full of pride, full of excitement for kind of what comes next. That transformational journey that we take them on over that 3 year or 1 year period, it's really important that we are getting that right. I see that transformation every day. I see how excited people are, students are, and our staff, in working together to deliver education, to deliver teaching, to undertake their research. But we don't take that for granted. A lot has changed, in terms of how education, higher education is funded. A lot has changed in terms of the value that people put on the education that they receive, and as we talked earlier about what they want to get out of that education. So, we do see this as, a very significant responsibility to, not only transform individual lives, but to have an impact on society more generally. So the graduates that are graduating from this university go on, as we said, they go into the creative sector, they go into creative industries, but they also go out more widely. And they have a massive impact on society and on the economy. And, again, we feel it's our responsibility to prepare them for that next stage in their journey. So, and it's a great, as I say, it's a big responsibility, but it's also a great responsibility to have as well when you see that transformation. And we've got some amazing alumni. We've got Stella McCartney, Jimmy Chu, Anthony Gormley, Idris Elba. We've got some amazingly famous alumni who, are just fantastic examples for us of around how undertaking that creative education can lead to an amazing, amazing career and amazing life more generally.
And just talking about you for a moment and using the term you just used then of journey, take us through a little bit about your own personal progression and journey to date. And I suppose call out some of the experiences that have really helped shape how you lead.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You don't often get time to sort of reflect on this because you're always in the
That's right.
You're always in the now, and you're always trying to plan for the future. But on occasion, I have had chance to reflect a little bit, and I guess the first thing to say is I didn't start out thinking that I would be a vice-chancellor in my career. So I am what we call and what we say as kind of first in family to go to the university. So I'm from a very small place in the northeast of England. It's quite a deprived part of the world. People in my family hadn't really even heard of or considered university education. So, at 18, I set off for Sheffield, where I did my undergraduate degree, and really had no sense of what was going to be involved in that because I had no reference points, either in my family really, or to be honest, even in the town that I come from, very few people went on to university. And I'd had a slightly odd experience at school as well, where my two best friends had been advised to take the Oxbridge exam, and my lecturer at the time, my teacher at the time, sort of said, "Oh, Karen, it's not for you because you don't kind of come from the right sort of background." So it was that sort of stuck with me. Not saying that that could have been my journey, but it is a great example really of how people can have an influence on your life. So off I went to the University of Sheffield, and that for me was, as we've just been talking about, I was transformed from the moment I sort of stepped in the door there. I did an undergraduate history degree, to graduating 3 years later. It changed my complete worldview of everything, mixing with international students, mixing with students from all sorts of backgrounds. And I've really held that as the thing that really motivates me. So at the University of the Arts, we're really proud of the fact that we want to offer and do offer our education to a broad spectrum of students who come from all sorts of backgrounds. We call it widening access within universities with higher education. We want to widen access to the education that we provide to as many people as possible, and that is very much that's my own background. And so it's it's the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, thinking about those students who will come to this university and will have their lives changed and have their lives transformed, and then the opportunities that opens up. And I guess the other thing is, it's about being a female leader in a sector that has taken a while to kind of see change. And, I do remember many occasions being, the only female in the room. And, I kind of lived through the 90s and the noughties and all of the change really that we have seen, but making sure, if you like, that I can help other women progress in their careers. That's also been something that's really, really driven me to ensure again that, everybody with potential gets the opportunity, to get the roles, to get the jobs, to make the contributions, that they're capable of doing. So again, I'm really keen to expand networks of, women in higher education and women in leadership more generally, because again, I can just contribute a little, from the experience that I've had. So those are the kind of things that really motivate me. Justin, and as you say, I've had the benefit of working in a range of different universities. I've worked up in Scotland as well, so do you see in different sectors, and I've also had the opportunity to set up campuses overseas. So working overseas in Oman, in Bangladesh, in New York, and setting up higher education institutions and getting to understand how different countries operate, what's important for them in terms of education, how they want to change, their own nations through the delivery of, the education that they offer. That's been, again, an amazing journey for me to be able to just engage in, with different governments and different educations across the globe, really. And, I'm really proud of that. It was not always easy, I have to say, going into different countries and setting up campuses. But I think, that model of higher education is also moving on as we learn more really about what other countries can do when they come to the UK. So it's much more of a kind of collaboration and partnership approach now to internationalising universities, which is great. So yeah, several things I think that have really motivated me and, kept me kind of grounded really in terms of being a Vice-Chancellor. And as I say, it was never my original aspiration to think that I would ever end up in kind of a chief exec role.
I mean, it feels like you're actually destined for it. And what a great things to kind of call out from kind of what the journey that you've been on. Let's talk about UAL for a minute. I think you were quoted as saying that you want sort of the University of Arts London to fulfil its potential to be the leading creative university in the world. What for you are the foundations that have to be in place for that to be true?
Yeah, so, there are various ways that we can realistically measure that. There are a lot of benchmarks that we can now use to look across higher education, not only in this country but globally. And as we've said already, this university works on a global scale. So I think making sure that the educational experience that we offer is excellent and being able to confidently say that. And we can do that through, feedback that we get from students, but also comparisons with, what the institutions are offering. But the university's mission extends beyond teaching. We are engaged in impactful research, which, is very much focused on some of society's biggest challenges and how we can use, again, as we talked about creative education, to impact on those challenges and to address some of those challenges. An example of that would be the work that, our Sustainable Fashion Centre based at London College of Fashion is working in. It's around sustainable materials. It's around how we can really improve the supply chain and the sustainability of that supply chain and the impact that that supply chain within fashion has on climate. We are doing work in our local communities as well. So we operate globally, but it's important that we have a real sense of place. We really don't want our colleges and UAL generally to be seen as an ivory tower. So the teams here are heavily involved in working in local community projects, bringing in that community, whether it's in King's Cross in Camden, whether it's in the East Bank in Stratford, whether it's in Elephant Castle at the London College of Communication, and engaging, young people, but also people at all ages, really, in the possibilities that creative education can really generate. So as a global institution, we're very conscious that we have an important role to play. And we measure the quality of what we do and how we do it, and we benchmark ourselves. And, we're pleased that, many of the, those measures and those league tables recognise, if you like, the contribution. So, for example, we're considered to be second in the world in terms of our art and design provision. But we work hard for that. We work hard for that. The staff work hard for that. It's absolutely about making sure that, the quality of what we're doing, the facilities that we have, the technical support that we provide, as I say, and, the more general support that we can provide, not just academic, but also welfare, well-being, financial to our students is, we have the best kind of services and support in place. And I have to say, increasingly, that support does require us to think about the cost of living for students. It requires us to think about the cost of study as well for students. These are major factors now. So we benchmark ourselves. We constantly look at what the market's doing. We look at where, skill needs are. We look at how we can continue to make ourselves relevant. And, the best way that we can do that is to bring industry and different sectors in to help us develop the curriculum, make sure that, what we're teaching is absolutely kind of at the leading edge of what industries and sectors require of our graduates.
Yeah, that's a great sort of segue into my next sort of question and topic, I suppose, in a sense. And, you don't have to convince me of the importance and power and impact of, the real kind of economy of creativity, I suppose, in a sense, right? It's the foundation of so many industries, and I think becoming ever broader. And you've obviously quoted so many sectors already in this conversation, but never a day goes by where there a new, I suppose, in a sense, sort of aspect of kind of how we think about creativity is changing kind of the perception of kind of the role of creativity in work and business and industry and so forth. And I love this point you're making around sort of, kind of relationships with industry. Tell me a little bit more about sort of how you at the University Arts London are engaging with industry to ensure students are future ready, without sort of, I suppose, in a sense, narrowing that kind of really important moment in anyone's development to be creative.
Yes, absolutely. So, we've got various schemes underway. As I said, most importantly, we bring industry in to make sure that we're teaching the right thing. But for our students, we've got a couple of schemes. We have mentorship schemes, placements, but we have, for example, students who work on what we call live briefs. So, different industries, different sectors genuinely, I think, benefit from having student input into, the projects, the design, the kind of processes, the way that they're shaping their own businesses. And invariably the feedback from, for example, those live briefs that those students work on, they benefit the students enormously because they get the opportunity to really understand what it's like to kind of work and undertake kind of real work in the real world, if you like. But also we find that the employers also think it's fantastic having that kind of fresh insight, really, from students, from cohorts of students into their business. So it can be a fantastic relationship and a really important kind of synergy that we create where the benefits go both ways, both to the businesses, but also back into the students, and then how we learn from that in terms of, again, what we teach. So it's a really important kind of cycle and circle that we try to create to enable that. And I think if we take different sectors, so for example, health, our students are working now with the health sector to look at how our disciplines, for example, in the arts can really benefit people who are, recovering from illness or, who are working through kind of long-term illnesses and, mental health diagnosis. In science, we're creating literally in the labs, new materials that are sustainable, that don't have such a negative impact on our environment. In engineering, we're working with the engineers to develop kind of new designs, new ways of doing things that really support, how engineers, construct a building. We've got architecture, we've got interior design, as part of our portfolio. So we can contribute across, major industries and major industrial sectors in a way that perhaps when you just think about, an art and design school, you wouldn't necessarily immediately think of the impact that we have. So I think there's always more to do. There's always more that we can do to build those relationships, and we're always really keen to hear from businesses and industries around, how we can continue to develop what we do in terms of that education and that skill development, so that it's relevant, when students go out onto the next chapter and onto the next stage of their own journey, and just, how it works. We're here to, support the economy. We make a major contribution to GDP. Creative sector generally is one of the fastest growing sectors in the UK. So again, we're making a major contribution, both, in terms of economic impact, but also in terms of societal impact as well.
I think the creative sector has done a really good job recently in doing exactly that, which is, kind of quantifying the impact it has as a sector. But as we've been talking about, I feel that, the horizontal aspect of creativity, is still an emerging force, I suppose, in terms of recognition of its impact and importance, in the world, particularly as we're going to talk about, of AI, right? When you're talking to industry leaders, where would you say they are on that sort of acknowledgement, recognition of the business of creativity and the importance of creativity in the workplace?
I think it's been an interesting 12, 18 months, really, particularly as, artificial intelligence and, immersive technologies, XR, etc., really now taking hold in the workplace, and in some cases, directly replacing jobs and roles. What that has led is to a discussion, I think, amongst many kind of senior teams around how you can maintain the kind of human component of what we're doing, in different industries, different sectors, and in society more generally. And I've heard the word creativity, I think, mentioned more in the last 12 months than possibly, in the last 5 years, because people have latched on to the importance of human creativity working alongside the technology, and in some cases not being replaced by technology, but definitely working alongside that technology, to build a better future, to build a better world, to enable, what we want to achieve as a society. So I think there is an understanding that human creativity is now a kind of key component of the technological age and technological revolution. But I think there's still more to be done. It's okay to say it and to talk about it, but I guess, it's really getting under the bonnet of what that really means in terms of, what are the skills that are going to be required in the future, and how do we make sure we continue to deliver those. So I think it's work in progress, to answer your question. I think it's, as I say, a really live topic, and it's great. We can, as a university in this space, we can really capitalise on that. But I think, I think there's always more to do, I think. But it does feel like we've got a moment here. We've really got a moment. And I'm really always open to ideas and suggestions about how we can, progress these conversations really at the most senior levels, either in government or, across industry sectors. One of the things I would say linked to this question is it's really important for us to make sure there's a pipeline. And that includes schools and colleges. So when we talk about education, obviously I'm talking about higher education, I talk about universities, but actually if studying those art, design, creative education subjects in schools is not supported and doesn't continue to attract, if you like, the acknowledgement of how important those subjects are, at GCSE and A level, then we do lose the pipeline. We lose that pipeline that comes into further and higher education. And so, again, one of our roles as an institution is to make sure that we're keeping the government fully appraised, really, of the importance of that pipeline. So supporting teachers who want to go into teaching creative education subjects within schools and colleges so that, we've got that pipeline all the way through. And then, as you say, we've got to keep that conversation going really with industry and with different sectors as well so that they understand the importance of that pipeline as well.
It's fascinating. You're almost acting as a bit of a bridge between sort of industry and then, the kind of primary and secondary kind of educators, I suppose, in a sense. That's a really I hadn't thought about it like that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's really important because we've been watching, for example, a recent review that the government has done around the curriculum, around what is taught in schools, and pleased to say that that's been very positive about creative education, but we've really got to maintain that. And I think, the other thing that we're quite focused on here is lifelong learning. What does that really mean? We offer undergraduate, we offer postgraduate. But it's really important that we also chunk up the learning that we do. I think, I've talked on a number of occasions now around how 3-year degrees may not be the qualification that people are seeking in that kind of linear way that they've previously studied, and that the finances that support university education support. And there is an opportunity to think about really breaking that up in a sort of a modular way going forward to enable people to dip in and dip out of education at a higher level as the circumstances and as the funding allows, really. So schools all the way through to continuing to offer, new skills, retraining, thinking about, different forms of education so that people can continue to update their skill set really throughout their careers as well. So, we're looking at the whole pipeline. I think it's really important. We feel that responsibility, as the largest creative education institution. We do feel that responsibility to make sure that pipeline remains intact. And,
talking about skills for a moment, when you look across, the University of Arts London, and sort of, you're dealing with kind of questions and data, evidencing up sort of, to summarize it, skills gaps. How are you approaching sort of, identifying kind of what those real gaps are, and then how are you looking to fill them?
Yeah, there's a big piece of work that's underway at the moment that the government has initiated around Skills England, and that is looking actually at roles, careers, jobs of the future, and really trying to document and articulate, if you like, what skills are going to be required to support the economy going forward. So there's a big piece of work there that we're engaged with. Which is really important, I think, for us to continue to influence and to continue to, as we said earlier, really make the case around the creative education and creativity component of future jobs. I think more generally, we just need to, as we said earlier, really, to keep listening to industry and ourselves to continue to invest really in technology and the technological advances. I think that will continue to determine the types of skills, the types of training, the types of education that we deliver. So I guess on multiple fronts, really, engaging with government, engaging with industry, and doing our own work and research, really, around what is going to be required, I think, of future generations and the future of work. So, we're not daunted by that. It's an exciting opportunity to continue to engage in that space. And I know our academic community are really engaged and really enthused, I think, about making sure that, what we do deliver, what we teach is current and continues to be future-proofed, I think, particularly, with the technological changes that we're facing into. But I think we're not daunted by it. We're excited by it.
I mean, I'm really glad to hear that. And that leads me to talk a little bit more about sort of that technology and, one, I suppose, broad piece of technology that we have to kind of zero in on, which is AI, of course. And we've got sort of lots of different kind of perspectives, and there's so many different ways of I suppose sort of tackling this question. But from your point of view, what's the right way for a creative university to respond to the threat, challenge, and opportunity of something so fundamental as AI?
So look, we created here a creative computing institute. So we teach. We teach creative subjects with AI, with robotics, with VR. So we're already in that space. I recently attended a sort of a term-end show for the postgraduates who are studying in the Creative Computing Institute. And honestly, it is absolutely amazing to see how they are applying, the artificial intelligence with the projects that they're creating through their course and through their own learning. And, there's a whole range of applications out there, from gaming through to, how we change kind of public services to, how we might deliver different sectors, including in the food industry as well. There's just a whole range of different opportunities out there. So we take it really responsibly. We're already in that space, when we're funding that space as well. I think we're undertaking research, so we've got leading professors who are working in the intersection between AI and creative education as well. There's the ethics, there's the issues around ethics, there's the issues around copyright in particular. We're very conscious that we're producing artists, designers, journalists who are going out there again into the real world, and who are facing major challenges around use of their work, and how we really protect that at this point. So there's a balance here for us. We are extremely engaged and enthusiastic about using the technologies and working with the tech as it develops. But also, we want to make sure that, we are protecting, if you like, and sustaining, the human component of, what our students and what our graduates are doing. So again, working around policy in this space is absolutely critical for us. And given, our knowledge and background, we're a good source, if you like, of knowledge and research to feed into some of those very challenging conversations around, protecting rights, the ethics of what we do and how we do it, and, generally, as I say, protecting IPR and copyright. It's quite scary. I mentioned the show that I went to earlier, put on by the Creative Computing Institute, and, a student was demoing images to me and asking me which ones were fake and which ones were real. And, by the third image, I got it completely wrong, and so, how can we, work in this space to kind of recognize human creativity alongside and in partnership with the tech. So, it's not easy, and it's moving very fast, and we're conscious that, we have to try and keep up with the pace here. And it's not always possible to do that. But what I would say is I've just walked into classrooms and just, whether it's fashion, whether it's art, whether it's, it's media, whether it's communications, I've walked into classes and seen our academics just engage with artificial intelligence, using it in a most amazing way, really, to complement and, to add to what we're teaching in the classroom. So, we're positive about this, but we're also mindful of, some of the risks, some of the huge risks associated with just implementing this without thinking through the full implications of what we do and how we do it.
And if money and time were no object, and you could wave a wand and implement one innovation at scale across your campuses tomorrow, what would it be?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I think, building on the work that I know, which is actually taking place in the university, it would be around the sustainability of materials and how we can really improve supply chains, for example, within the fashion industry. So there's a huge amount of work that our technical teams are doing to create, material that is recyclable. And all of our students now, it doesn't matter what subject area they're working in within the university, are very focused on recycling materials and making sure that, we are really careful about the impact that we're having in that space. So I guess it would be, the work that's being done here on designing and developing new materials that would have a major impact on the fashion industry.
Let's leap forward for a minute, and you can sort of ignore my timeline of 3 to 5 years if you want, because some people will say that's too long and some people will say that's not long enough. But when you sort of think, about sort of, the future, what do you think will sort of, define creative education?
I'm really positive. That's the first thing to say about how a university such as UAL, which totally focuses on creativity and creative education, I'm really positive about, I guess, the impact that we can continue to have. I think it will shift. I think that we'll all be working in different ways, and we will be adapting and adopting to technology, and that will very much transform the way that the institution works, not just in terms of what we teach, but how we actually operate as an organization. It's going to dramatically change the way that we do a number of kind of business business tasks and our business processes and the way that we communicate with each other, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, I'm confident in our ability as an institution. We've been around, most of our colleges have been around since the 1800s. So, we've kind of rolled with technology, industrial revolutions, different revolutions. And, we have the ability, I think, as a community to embrace that and to do that. So, I do see it as a major shift. It is a major transformation that we're going through now, globally. But I do think that we will continue to have a fantastic and a very important role. And as we said earlier, it's very much about mixing the human with the technology, and taking a leading role in how we define that going forward. So yeah, we're really positive. We're really excited about that, and we're really excited about it for our students, because those are the people who are really going to go out and make the change and make the difference. Next generation and the next generation on. But how exciting to be part of that. It's fantastic for us.
Let's finish with a quick fire round. So short answers, no pressure. First thing that comes into your head, Karen, okay?
Okay.
If you could instantly download any skill into your brain, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. I guess this is a little bit embarrassing for somebody who heads up a creative institution, but I would really, really love to be able to paint properly. I mean, I honestly would love to be able to do that. I can draw a little bit, but actually having the ability to really paint, particularly, I think landscapes. I would love it. I would love the opportunity to be able to do that. That would be amazing.
And who is your dream creative collaborator? And they can be living or dead.
Oh my goodness. We have so many amazing alumni. I daren't call out anybody in particular, but all I would say is, we are blessed to have, some of the world leading artists, performers, designers out there, and just, the opportunity to have them all in one place and, to work together to support the University of Art and Creativity more generally, I think is, it's everybody's wish in this university that we can just really tap into that. We've got an amazing group of people out there already. So I know I didn't answer your question, Justin. But,
Very diplomatic.
Just being diplomatic.
And finally, this one's more personal. Teleportation becomes real. Where's the first place you go for inspiration?
Oh, well, because I'm a historian by a kind of original study, I would absolutely have to go back in time. I'd love to be able to time travel. So, well, I don't know where I'd go, but I'd love to sort of see, England, London in particular. I guess around the time of, Fire of London, and just to see the impact that had and the changes that brought about. So definitely time travel, and, having a look at London in previous decades. I'd love to do that. I'd really love to do that.
What a great way to end. Karen, this has been a really inspiring conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Justin.